Alrighty. Maybe let's just quickly already get into maybe the first introduction parts, which we can just do via the chat. But let me just give you a quick intro of myself first, because I think most of you haven't met me yet, because we're quite a larger round or an extended round to just the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative related colleagues. So thanks for joining also from the Jeff team, from all the organizations that are involved in the larger project and initiative of safeguarding some of the resilient reefs around the world. So what we wanted to do today is really dive a bit deeper into what does reef positive businesses mean? How can the private sector influence conservation in coral reefs particularly? And what are some of the players that are relevant there? So my name is Chris, and I joined WWF in November as a blue economy consultant. So my background is really more in the private sector, honestly, and I joined as a secondee. So I do have now roughly one more month with WWF. And my ideal outcome out of this webinar would be that, of course, like to spur some ideas around all of you to maybe get a better feeling of where you stand on your sustainable blue economy journey, because I know talking about some of the CRRI, but also Jeff related tasks, I think sustainable blue economy is just starting to kick off and some of the activities here and there. So it would be great if, just some ideas come out of this, and always feel free to reach out to me afterwards as well. And I'm happy to jump on one-on-one calls to brainstorm a few more ideas and maybe lay out some plans, because I think the field in itself is quite big, and it's quite hard to find the right focus on where to push the few resources and time that everybody of us has. So that would be my goal for today. But maybe before that, it would be great if you could just use the chat and just let everybody know, like, from where you're dialing in today, so that we can see a bit of what time zones we are covering, because I feel like I'm being in Germany. It's relatively early, and for some of you, it might be relatively late already. So that would be great if everybody could just write down in the chat from where they're joining. Nice, Maggie. Fiji, yeah, that's a later time zone. Yeah, exactly. If you maybe even can already add your organization as well, then we know already where you're from, what you're doing, and potentially what role you have within the larger project, so that I can also maybe tailor this a bit more to some areas on the fly. Yeah, all right. Seeing lots of our countries, Fiji, Indonesia, Philippines, Solomons. Not sure whether we also have somebody from Madagascar and Tanzania there. Ah, yeah, Madagascar, Ariel, yes. And Dominique. So I guess some of you probably know each other already, because you're working together in the countries as well. So talking now about cross CRRI and Jeff. So that's, I think, also a bit of our goal, what we've discussed over the last weeks, to make this collaboration and intertwinement a bit more over the next weeks. While some more people are joining, maybe if some of you, if you have already had some experience with topics on sustainable blue economy and some activities that you're covering currently in your countries, feel free to put that also in the chat, and whether you have a specific focus right now, because I feel like there are different angles to how you can approach this, whether from the advocacy side on governments and financial institutions, or really on financial support for some smaller businesses and technical support, or maybe even larger corporate partnerships. So anything that you might already have started in your countries. Whether it's, for example, we've been talking with the Solomon Islands around sea grape based soaps and body lotions. These kind of topics would be interesting to hear what kind of examples you're pioneering, given in mind or having in mind that most of you are just starting with some of the sustainable blue economy topics. Also, if you feel free to just unmute yourself and just talk about it. Like, I also want to have this a bit more interactive, and feel free to just give your questions throughout the meeting. But I also have a dedicated spot in the end. All right. Maybe in the meeting itself, some of you have some specific examples or something like that, and then feel free to just put them out here and let everybody know, because I feel like that could also be a good platform to learn from some of your activities. And I think for the last point here on the clear roadmap, I think specifically for Jeff, I think that's something that's about to happen now in the next month with Terranomics. So what I would do now, I think we're quite a few people now. I would just head into what I've planned for today. So what I'm going to do in the end is I'm going to share like a larger extended version with a bit more content on it than I have here, so that you can just read through it and can also leverage some of the material, whether you want to talk with some of your government stakeholders or some businesses, and just have some brainstorming sessions. So hopefully this material will also help you then afterwards. So what this document is and what it's not. So I think, as you can see on the left-hand side, it's really more like a high-level overview for specifically NGOs on how to maneuver in the reef-positive investment space. It should give a quick overview of what are some stakeholders that are active there, because quite a few already are. And I think just having like an overview present where everything is consolidated could be quite helpful to reach out to the relevant people. And then also just understanding the market landscape. So what are actually reef-positive businesses? And having said that, I think some of the ones that I'm just going to talk about today are also just businesses that are just not reef negative, so reef neutral, so to say, whether we're talking about, I don't know, surf schools, scuba diving schools, etc. And so what this document is not, it's not like a step-by-step implementation guideline, because I think first of all, you have to really set like the strategy for each of the countries on what you want to focus on, because I think not everybody has dedicated resources in each of the countries for these activities. And the scope of how much work you actually want to put in there can be quite different depending on whether you want to put your efforts into advocacy or really want to start or kickstart local businesses, which requires a bit more on the ground technical assistance and so on. So it also is not specific technical specifications for reef conservation projects, or a complete operational guideline for running these businesses. So that's something that it's not. But like I said, the overall goal is really to like spur some ideas today and give you a good overview of what is out there currently and what could potentially be done in some of your countries and areas. So I think, as you all know, given that you're working with coral reefs, over the last years, corals have been degrading faster and faster, and are facing existential threats from different kind of areas, whether it's climate temperature, whether it's overfishing and destructive behaviors in some of the areas. And this is happening while corals are still making up a large or playing a huge role in some of the communities with 275 million people living close to reefs, or the direct impact on the fishing, on local fishing industries and tourism revenues. And not only that, some of the ecosystem services, especially towards infrastructure and loss of property, can be um, quite huge, because, like I said, a lot of people are living close to these reefs and are taking in some of the advantages from them, whereas these ecosystem services are currently mostly not accounted for within regulatory perspectives of governments, which is, for example, one part of advocacy which should be more out there, that they're really providing huge value to most of the communities. Um, so what are reef positive solutions? I think what we can see is that within the larger space of nature positive transition, so money that goes towards nature positivity within the terrestrial or the sea space. That's like the larger framework that we're maneuvering in, and that's where most of the money is flowing into. Just by comparing then the terrestrial with the ocean side. So the terrestrial side still holds much more of the financing for nature solutions right now, whereas the sustainable blue economy currently is starting to pick up, even though it has been a topic over the last 10 years. So you will have seen some of these more innovative financing terms, such as blue bonds that have been issued, similar to the coral bond, for example, in Indonesia. You have seen blue carbon projects happening here and there as some of the few pilot projects. I think on blue insurance as well. I think there's a project going on with Magi in Fiji as well right now, and these larger debt for nature swaps where in Belize or in some other countries, they have issued millions of dollars for conservation, especially for the ocean conservation. Is something that's happening more and more. And I think now, with just UNEC having happened, I think a few more commitments have been made. Whereas I think it's still falling a bit short towards what is essentially needed to conserve the ocean and really meet all of the sustainable development goals from the UN. But I think more and more innovative financing products are out there and are being used by some of the even institutional investors. And what does then reef positive solutions mean within that space? So that's really targeted towards businesses and financial institutions that contribute to the long-term reef health and resilience, and thereby also benefit the coastal communities and help to reduce some of the local pressures, such as agricultural runoff or destructive fishing measures, etc., and thereby have a positive impact on the coral reefs around that. And this is really like the focus around this document today and about this webinar. Just let me see if yeah, if you do have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, because I'm not sure if I see the chat all the time. And how I personally, and through some of the discussions that I've had and the research, came up with like a framework of how to think about reef positive solutions and how to have impact on them as an NGO. It's really 4 players in the end. So you will have the government and regulators and nonprofits, and on the other side, the investors and financial institutions, which are kind of the catalyst for really driving reef positivity. Especially, I think, in the context now of NGOs, there's always the different kind of scale that we can think about. There are these huge debt for nature swaps or for conservation swaps, where hundreds of millions are poured into some of the countries, or bonds are issued that are taken up by large investors that are usually invested into already established businesses, which is on the left-hand side, like the part which involves really large fisheries, for example, where they try to be more sustainable, or renewable energy projects or larger agricultural projects. Whereas I think what we're as now CRRI and Jeff are more focused on is a bit more on these emerging businesses part. So that's really some of the micro and small businesses out there, whether it's the sea grape business that I was talking about, whether it's sea cucumber farming, oyster pearl farming, some smaller aquaculture businesses, or even some blue carbon projects. So this is really something where we want to enable communities to really get or find alternative livelihoods to current livelihoods that they have, and offer them something new and build something from the ground up, which is of course a bit different to the large scale model, let's say, where lots of money is being invested into already established businesses. So that's really a bit the focus that we, as I think, as an initiative, have to really say where do we want to focus on? Do we want to put our efforts into advocacy on governments to really like drive these catalyst players to give the right incentives to established businesses, to give the right incentives to financial institutions? Or do we want to work together in forms of corporate partnerships with some larger businesses? I think WWF specifically has lots of these partnerships around the world, and they can, of course, could be extended towards then coral reefs in some of these areas that we are active in. Or one last avenue would be like, do we want to focus on really uplifting some of the local communities and help them create alternative livelihoods, especially, for example, taking into account some of the women. I think there are some projects that also Rachel, I don't know if she's on the call yet, has worked on, where we can really help them steer their own businesses. So that's kind of like the framework around the 4 players, how I think about it and how I structured the document as well. You will see some of the players that are already active in the space within each of these 4 stakeholders. I mean, there's obviously quite a few of investors and financial institutions that are large scale active around the world, like the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, Mirova, that have put hundreds of millions already into the private sector. And then there are, of course, lots of governments, regulators, like, I mean, you will know Jeff, the Green Climate Fund, that are also then sponsored again by United Nations, funded grants, etc. And as well, some established businesses have been or have put out quite a few efforts, such as Mars, on really conserving coral reefs specifically, and more emerging businesses and startups are getting active in that space as well. Because I think over the last years, the investors that are active in impact investment or sustainable investments in general have raised more and more money, and can see that there's a way of coming to profitability on some of these startups. But like I said, this is still a bit more on the global scale. I think for some of you, it's really important to also see how an NGO can help these local communities in itself to scale something up. Let me just quickly pause there if there are any questions right now. All right. So why is this important that we now try to bring a bit more of the private sector as well into the space? Because still largely until today, most of the funding is coming from public sector sources, whether Jeff, GCF, or the UN directly, or development money from some of the larger countries. So what we do have with the Sustainable Development Goal 14 for oceans is roughly 175 billion a year at investment or at costs that are projected to really help meet the goal, and which we currently fall very shortly off. But for coral reef specifically, I mean, I don't know how accurate that would be though, but the coral reef breakthrough target says that roughly 12 billion would be needed to cover the target for the coral reef breakthrough target, which is in the end also going into the 30 by 30 target and larger protection areas. And they just calculated with 1% of the money that should be given towards SDG 14, given the fact that 1% of the ocean is covered by coral reefs. So yeah, still largely today, there's roughly 60,000 square kilometers covered under protection from 250,000 kilometers of coral reefs. Whereas, of course, as everybody of you knows, the quality of protection differs quite a bit around these 60,000 square kilometers. So what I want to first get into is the part around the emerging businesses. So this is the first deep dive of the document, and what kind of reef positive or reef neutral solutions are really out there. So I've grouped them in 8 categories. It's around sustainable tourism with for example, snorkeling and diving operators that give a certain revenue or dividend share towards coral reef protection. So I think that's something that's happening a lot already. I was just recently in Fiji as well, and lots of the diving operators there are not necessarily actively having a local MPA or an LMMA in the area, but what they've done is they have kind of bilaterally made agreements with some of the communities and villages around these islands, where they said, we're going to use some of these areas for snorkeling, and we're going to give you a certain amount of the revenue share that we're going to get out of that, which compensates them for not being able to fish in these areas anymore, and thus really bringing a lot more protection to these areas by also then compensating some of the villages around that have been fishing in these areas as well. Then another one, which I would go into a bit more detail, is around sustainable aquaculture. Of course, each of these businesses comes with a few strings attached. I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of risk to do it wrongly. But I think in general, driving for like the best approach to some of these businesses will help in the end also some of the reefs. So I'm just going to go into a bit more details around sea grapes harvesting. And then the next one would be around ecosystem restoration. So there's lots and lots more startups out there that are developing new innovative reef structures for restoration, even though restoration, of course, in itself is a quite a huge task to do if the macro environment isn't really changing around the ocean. Then around pollution reduction, so it's really around sustainable shipping fuels, for example. Lionfish capturing for sustainable leather is one of the innovative approaches. Then around software and technology, I think there's more and more software around AI, digital twins being developed right now to forecast how different activities could impact the reefs, and more robots are even actively trying to restore the reef. I think somebody just joined who's not muted yet, so it would be great if you could mute yourself. Yes. Hi, everyone. All right. Then around the next category around waste management is another topic, sustainable agriculture to reduce the runoff, and then a bit more innovative as well. Is I think that goes a bit along the lines of the last COP, where they accumulated some funding from larger pharmaceutical companies around a fund that should protect some of the jungle area, and find out about whether there are certain animals in there or bacteria that could be could help them develop new drugs for the pharmaceutical business. And something like that could be also thought of for coral reefs around coral gene banks, etc. So where you actively try to conserve the biodiversity to in the future also help make research with them and develop potential drugs around them. So what are some of the current challenges that we see in the space? So why, like, this sounds quite promising, right? Some of these businesses, some of them are out there, but why is it not like picking up like crazy and everybody's pouring millions of money into them? I think there's still a huge reliance on public finance. So still there's not quite enough private investors that are active in the space or that are a bit too risk averse to invest in some of the regions, in some of the countries where there's not the regulatory framework for it yet, or where there's just not been a long-term proof that this can work. And what I've heard as well from some of our colleagues who have worked on the GCF application for Fiji, for example, is that some of these startups are then, for example, supported in the beginning stage of really the inception stage, but then throughout the startup cycle, they lose some of the support and thus then have it more difficult to really scale in the end. And that's why lots of these innovations are still in the early development stages. And the regulatory environment, that's what I meant before around also payment for ecosystem services, such as, I mean, you'll know it as well. It might be even more beneficial to have a healthy reef in front of some coastal areas in comparison to like concrete seawalls. But the regulatory environment still does not really incentivize for these active restoration works. And often you will still have some very remote areas. I mean, I was talking to our Indonesian colleagues as well here and there. In some areas where there's protected marine space, it's just very remote to build up large scale businesses because the supply chain would not be there to really take some of the sustainable agriculture, for example, and really ship it out of these areas. So that's why some of the more low scale building from the ground up businesses could be more relevant there, such as seaweed farming, sea grapes harvesting, mud crabs, etc. Is there maybe any of these businesses that you currently see in your countries that, or where you say that that's super interesting for us to pursue something like that? I know that, like, not putting you on the spot now, but I know that in Fiji and in Solomon Islands with you, Jackie, I think with the sea grapes business, I think that's something that has been started last year, November, and where the pilot was quite successful of the body lotion and soap that has been sold. And I think that's something that's hopefully on the way now for the next few weeks. I don't know if you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Just in terms of that, for quite some time, we've been working with one or two communities on the management, the women-led community managed areas for the sea grapes, because the sea grapes are traditionally eaten sort of fresh and sold in the local markets. But there was an opportunity to learn from Indonesia actually about how their sea grapes are used for making other products, both in terms of body lotions and soaps, but then there's also the option for drying, cryovacking, and other ways of sort of using the sea grapes for food and sort of increasing longevity of the food, because as a fresh product, it has a limited shelf life. So yeah, we've done the testing, we've done the training. We're now going into the feasibility side of it, and whether communities and small businesses can do this without sort of intervention, or if they do need sort of support, financial support in some ways, can that come from accessing, say, small loans from their savings clubs, or do they need to have access to other sources of external funding, small loans and stuff? So we're really sort of now moving into that whole business feasibility side of looking at that value adding opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for the extra information. I think these kind of blueprints here around like how this process could look like and what kind of business sense would be needed. I think that's something that I'm going to share as well with you afterwards, if it could potentially help you as a blueprint with that. But I think what Jackie said is quite important. Maybe before that, you will just see a few of these these startups here that are currently active in the space. So you will have like 3D printed clay structures for restoration, leather from invasive species, lots of software startups and robotic startups that are like doing very innovative work, but wanted to go a bit deeper into the startup cycle really, because that's what Jackie mentioned. So what is it what like these startups and local community-led businesses really need? And I think there's different stages to each of those. And in the beginning, really around the ideation and conception phase, there's different support stakeholders, whether it's Core Lab, Blue Alliance, Sedge Blue. There's quite a few that have rounds where we as NGOs can help them get into, for example, and connect some of the dots here and there, offer them technical advice. But I think especially in the beginning when you really want to prove the idea. And I think that's what you also did, Jackie, in the Solomons, is really help them purchase some of the equipment for a pilot case, help them make the product, do some of the kind of climate vulnerability assessments and see how can they do these businesses in a sustainable way, which goes a bit into the side note that I had before of doing these businesses also then in the right way, and then help them with some of the expertise that they might not have, and then help them find the right partners. But that's of course a bit about there's still the question of what is the strategy, of what's the focus that we as a initiative and as Jeff also want to have. Whereas then in the next stage where it's around really validating the idea, and I think that's where you're a bit in right now, Jackie, with the feasibility studies, then is also organizing some co-design workshops around how can the product look like, how can we help them sell a product, what kind of costs and numbers do they have to check, is it really profitable what they're doing? Can we help them build the right capacity so that they can do it on their own? Is this something that is sustainable over the long term without much or ongoing support, so to say? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another important element of this is also what impact could it have on food sources, like the food security, if the sea grapes product are being diverted away from being an important source of food and then being used to create body lotions or soaps or something else. So there's also that element. And is there a potential environmental impact, if communities are starting to overharvest? Because at the moment, in some of the communities, they have quota system where the women have set up quotas themselves for how much they can sell each day or when they can sell in the market to sort of spread the impact on the harvesting side. But, if there's this incentive now to go and sort of have these value-added products, what sort of social impact will that also have as well as an environmental impact? So those are the kinds of issues that we're going to be looking at now.
Yes, absolutely. And I think once we do have some of these insights, especially now, for example, around sea grapes, hopefully some of these learnings can also be taken to some other countries where we're doing this kind of work, because I think this is particularly useful, right, to see what impact do certain actions have on related areas, because I think making this bridge from, okay, we're trying to now help them create soaps, body lotions, etc., and making the bridge to what kind of impact does this really have on other areas for the sea grape, such as it as a food source, is quite important. Just to kind of finalize now this part here around then the next phase of the businesses, where we really go into like already a bit larger businesses then in the scaling area. I think that's really where some of these larger funds like the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, Mirova, etc. come in, because I think there are players who want to either give money directly to already relatively large established businesses, or let's say scaling businesses, or towards, for example, what the Global Fund for Coral Reefs is doing, give the money to some other catalysts such as the Matanataki Fund in Fiji, for example, which then gives the money again towards some other local businesses, so that they have a broader impact on more and more stuff. But I think still there with some of these businesses and investors as an NGO, we can still help them support, because I think especially giving this perspective, which Jackie mentioned right now, what kind of impact does it have on related areas and how can we do it the right way? Is still something where we and you all have lots of expertise in and can add to kind of like the portfolio of the support that some of these businesses will get there. And then lastly, it's really around the establishing businesses and how to help them diversify. I think with some of the corporate partnerships, I think there are some bridges and corporations that can be built on partnerships and help facilitate some cross-sector innovation projects on, for example, how can some of the benefits that we see in this business apply to agriculture, energy, or some other related industries. And yeah, here are just some of the players that you will see there. All right, jumping into the next deep dive around for investors and financial institutions, because as I said in the beginning, we do have these 4 stakeholder types, and I think it's also important to understand a bit if, like in the future, we set up a bit of our own investment infrastructure where we want to microfinance some local led communities. I think it's really important to have the right cornerstones for these investments, or if we support some of these businesses, we want to really understand how do these investors think, how does a good investor look like, and that's why I wrote down some of the best practices for these investors. So I think first and foremost, everybody of them should have a reef-positive investment policy where they really lay out what is their overall investment goal, how does it align profitability or financial incentives towards sustainable incentives as well. How do they conduct due diligence? What do they look at? How do we assess whether some businesses not only have the traditional due diligence metrics that are more financial and legal, but also like the ecological and community due diligence. I think that's quite important to also get that right. The third part is really you don't want to have investors that just spend their money and then they're out and wake up in 10 years and see whether something happened. But I think really engagement is key here, especially when we're talking about some of these smaller scale inception type of businesses. And this goes hand in hand with collaboration among stakeholders. So how can we bring in more and more partners, technical support, so that these businesses can really have the best learning experience? And I think lastly, which we know from an NGO space as well as the monitoring and evaluation should be really transparent and clear, and it should have clear objectives and KPIs already set out in the beginning that one can track against. And I think there are some investors that are doing this quite well on a large scale already. So yeah, please, like I said, bear in mind this is now kind of like the best practices, which is why this is often a bit more high level, but some of these things are certainly applicable to much more like micro scale or small scale as well. As you can see here, for the ones who don't know, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs has been set up together with Pegasus Capital Advisors, who is a private equity fund, and the UN. And they roughly have like $750 million to spend on coral reef conservation and restoration projects. And they are also supported by the Malloy Fund, which is an impact fund, which also invests into sustainable ocean-related businesses. And then there's also another larger one is Mirova, which manages 132 million ocean fund, and they are also active all around the world, whereas most of the investments really go into fisheries and help them to become more sustainable. So some of you might have heard some of them. So I don't want to go too deep into these because I'm just going to send them around, and I think this might not be interesting to everybody. But I think just in general, there are different types of investors in that space. So you would have philanthropies who have the maximum environmental and social impact. So they don't really expect any returns, or if they expect any, then it would be below market rate, and then even those returns would be spent again into conservation work. And their investment horizon is usually quite long. And whereas some of the impact investors, for example, or especially venture capital or private equity money, the focus is really more on having an above market rate return, which they also would expect in really private markets. And their time horizon is roughly 5 to 10 years, usually, where they want to make their money or like double or triple their investments. And then you, of course, have some development finance institutions. They usually have like concessional returns and certain benchmarks that they want to hit. But it's really similar to some of the bonds that are being issued that usually just cover inflation, like 2% or something per year. So it's really not above market there. But I think these policy frameworks, I think they should have a large commitment towards sustainable practices, community engagement, and then the transparency in reporting. And I think the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, I also linked it here, is doing this quite well in their framework, which they have set out in the beginning as an investment policy, where they focus on protection, transformation, restoration, and recovery, and have largely laid out all of their KPIs that they want to hit, and track them quite openly in an open M&E tool. And then what these investors do at the beginning before they decide on investing into some of these companies is this due diligence, where they check really, is this the right business to invest in, from some of the others. And I think what I at least usually would do in the traditional private sector market is you would look at commercial questions. So is the market growing? How's the competitive position? What are some partnerships there, or a financial view? How's the current financial health of the company? Are they spending way too much? I think in the beginning it's quite all right to spend a lot to kind of get the business growing and make the point of finding the right, we call it like product market fit, where really people want the product. And then the last one would be around legal topics, whether there are any risk associated with it. But I think nowadays, especially in the reef positive area, it's more and more important to also have these ecological assessments. So what we've been talking about, like what kind of impact does it have if we come to, let's say, year 3 and have this scale of the business? Are we still able to do it sustainably? And what does need to happen in order to be still sustainable if we are able to scale that business? And then lastly, of course, how can we include the communities, and what are measures to be taken in order to make sure that this respects the traditional rights and practices that are especially practiced in, for example, some of the Pacific areas on the islands that we have there. So what I would say, like from researching some of the investors and some of the best practices here and there, I think what lots of them have is three kind of guidelines or policies that they really focus. So the financial incentive alignment, the first one is really around, if we give as an investor certain goals to the business, let's say it's a revenue target of achieving that much amount in year X. Does that also have a sustainability linked target towards it? So are we linking some of these financial incentives towards sustainability incentives as well? So that's an important factor. Is the investor actively participating in the governance? So do they have a seat on the board? Are they actively engaged in steerco meetings every couple of months or quarterly? And then lastly, do they really help build capacity and collaboration for these companies? Are they building new partnerships? Are they connecting some of these local stakeholders with people from the government, people from regulatory bodies, etc.? And I think, for example, Mirova is some like the investor who does that quite nicely. They usually link their performance fees to the achievement of impact targets. So when the startup or the business hits certain impact targets and sustainability linked targets, they get a payout of another investment tranche. And they have usually quite specific KPIs to track their progress and help them really get into alliances, help them also advocate for them as well to make their voice louder. And I think these are some important factors to be considered, whether an investor is doing these or whether to do these as an investor. Yeah, this is what I was talking about, like this whole collaboration around, like, are they talking to national environmental agencies, fishery departments, indigenous communities, international bodies, etc. And are they, for example, involving them or making their voice louder in some of these communities, such as the Reef Plus community from the Global Fund for Coral Reefs? I think with ICRRI and GCRMN, like everybody knows these, and I think it's really important to bring some of these stories from some of the businesses there as well. And I think especially investors have the voice usually in these events, in these communities, and have to help them advocate as well there. And I think the last point is just around knowledge sharing, because I think we as an initiative have to make sure that we are sharing our knowledge among all different kind of countries, which is already hard enough. But then also, I think some of these investors have to kind of, voice their successes as well. Then just the last point on for investors and best practices is really like a functioning monitoring and evaluating reporting. So I think just some of these points here on the left-hand side, you will find as well for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. So what they do have is a really clear theory of change based on the 4 outcomes that I mentioned before around protection, transformation, restoration, and recovery. And each of these outcomes really has, similar to what we do have as well in our initiative, has clear indicators. So change in coral reef health, and for each of these indicators, they have certain KPIs and objectives that they want to have. And I think it's really, really important to have these upfront, because I think if you make them up along the way, then you kind of tailoring your objective towards what's actually happening in reality right now, and you're missing the point of following some of your objectives and strategy. All right, and that's all around investors. I think still for now, I think most of our work is still centered around public sector investors, from GEF money, GCF money that we're pursuing. But I think more and more in the future, not only because of unreliable countries for funding for these kind of organizations, but also because just the need of increasing private sector money, it's really important to get some of these investors as well into the space and help them and steer them with our expertise as NGOs. And this brings me a bit to the last few slides now on governments, regulators. So what you can see here, it's really right now 160 billion. So like the 80% is really coming from public finance towards nature-based solutions, and only 35 billion is coming from private finance, and most of that is going to biodiversity offsets and credits. Some are transforming their supply chains to make them more sustainable. I think some areas such as impact investing have been growing massively over the last years, so really year over year they've been growing a lot, and there's more money coming from that as well. But some of these others they're there, but they're obviously not that big yet, unfortunately. And even in the nature-based solution space or investment space, reef-positive investments really only make up a very, very small portion because, yeah, most of that is going towards terrestrial projects and initiatives, and there's really still a lot of advocacy and communication needed to get more financing, just even for sustainable blue economy topics. Yeah, and what does this mean for established businesses? What you will see here on the left-hand side is a figure from the State of Finance for Nature, which I think the new version should come out very soon as well for 2024. You will see that even despite a lot of advocacy, the subsidies or harmful subsidies is still growing. You can see it from 2021 towards 2022. It's been grown massively. Of course, this is largely driven as well by energy crisis through COVID. But still, I think the picture still holds true today, even after COVID with the Ukraine war, etc. So you will still see lots of harmful subsidies for fossil fuels, agriculture. And if you put against that just how much, so that's like the public sector money, let's say that's having harm on the environment. And if you look at the private financing, so there's even almost triple that amount of these harmful subsidies is so 5 trillion US dollars is going into investments into nature negative finance. So that could be oil investments, gas investments, etc. And if you put against that some of the nature-based solutions financing, it's really like the nature negative finance is 140 times higher than what is currently ported to nature-based solution finance. I know that's probably not the only thing to compare it with, but it gives you a bit of the scale of how small some of the nature-based solutions financing still is in comparison to some of the, let's say, industrial investments that have been happening in the space. And that's why it's really time to reverse this, unfortunately, even widening gap, and triple down onto investments into nature-based solutions. And some of the companies, or one company that's trying to at least achieve that on the side is Mars. I don't know how many of you have heard from their restoration program, because they're also active in some of our countries, I think. And they have globally since, I think they're doing it since 2006, but since 2011 they have 72 restoration sites across 12 countries. They work with lots of NGOs. They have their own patented reef stars, which you can see here on the bottom right, and they have roughly 6,000 of them installed alone in 2024. And in 2024 as well, have 47,000 square meters of restored reefs, which is quite a lot. Of course, some of the impact could still be, or the positive impact could still be reduced by the heat wave that we've experienced in 2024 as well. But they're having really good successes on some of their restoration work, and could be a cool partner as well for some of the work that we are doing. And they're really doing it in a science-based way. So they really have dedicated resources and research personnel on the ground in some of these areas. All right. Lastly, I mean, I didn't see any questions. Just wanted to make sure that you also get another link for the course that has been developed by the Jeff team as well on coral reefs and the sustainable blue economy. So please remind me, I'm not super sure whether that's still on the EDX platform or whether it's on the other platform, but I'm happy to share the link afterwards as well. But you could just scan the QR code if you're keen to just dive a bit deeper and get a certification as well on sustainable blue economy, because they really have some really cool videos, activities, and tasks to learn from that are really hands-on. And this could like also step change a bit some of the knowledge that you might have. But now I've been talking for like an hour, so if you do have any more questions, just feel free to let me know. Yeah, I'll share the link as well. Let me just quickly scan it, then I can share it with my phone.
Chris, I'll ask a question if I could.
Yeah.
The question of, like, I guess one of the issues always when you're in the ocean or sea space is around tenure, right? And actually the, like, who has the rights to, like, the benefits that might accrue. Did you see, in looking through all of this stuff, did you see any interesting models or approaches to try and deal with this tenure question?
So you mean like tenure in terms of somebody's owning the space and
yeah, like it's like no one. It's a public good, right? Most of the ocean and the sea is public good. So who actually gets the rights? And then even from an investor perspective, it's challenging for investor because you don't necessarily have like the recourse to an asset when it's a public good.
yeah. So I mean, this goes a bit into the direction of marine protected areas as well, right? Because I think you often have, let's just pick the example of Australia. You have the Great Barrier Reef Authority, which is managing the Great Barrier Reef, right? And they have established with the government together like the other way around, like they've been granted a license to really protect and work on the area, right? And they have zoned out certain areas for certain activities and have given levies, taxes, and whatnot on doing these activities in these zones. So I think it's often an interplay then between governments in the end of being willing to actively protect certain areas and then having semi non-profit entities in that space who are able to protect it and classify some of the activities that can be done there. I think in some of the Pacific islands, from what I've known, and I think some others would be probably even better to comment on that. You will often have traditional owners of some of the areas around, especially like in the exclusive economic zone, where you could have these locally managed marine areas and then clarify some of the activities that can happen there together with the communities. But of course, if you're talking a bit about not no man's land, but certain areas where there's not a clear ownership, I think it's a different question. And then it's probably, from what I would say now, it's probably then some bilateral agreement that you have to make with the government, I guess, as a business. Yeah, but I didn't like find now a particular case on where some corporations or some smaller businesses have done these kind of agreements. Or at least I would have to think about that now. Yeah, but it's a good question because I think that's often probably one of the problems or issues if you want to start something in a country and really scale something. To get first this agreement that you're like the sole user of these areas for certain projects, right? Any other questions or remarks or
There's a question in the chat, Chris.
all right. So I think that's a really good question because I think it's kind of both. It depends a bit on the kind of investor type. So what I was speaking of mostly would be the first thing that you said. So some of the fund needs to be returned because investors such as impact investors, they usually want to invest over, let's say, 5 to 10 years and then double their investment, let's say. But then, of course, there are some more some investors that are more on the philanthropic side. So you could almost see it as grants that don't have to be returned in the end. So I would say, yeah, like I said, probably most of what have been focused on is really investments in terms of some of the stuff needs to be returned. But there are still other opportunities as well. I hope that answers that question. But I also see Margie with her hand up.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you as well for sharing this very extensive and very informative webinar. I think I'm going to go back to, I think it was your first slide or your second slide where you had what this document covers and what this document does not cover. I'm also just very interested in where it is I can find a document where all those crosses are, because I'm finding more and more that through having to implement some of the very basic blue economy type projects, apart from having to learn it and then implement it at the same time, it's almost like we have to think 10 steps ahead for the project, for the community that we are working with. And it's these step-by-step guides that I think we are at this point, and I'm speaking very specifically around Fiji projects and as well as around, you know, just having a guide around operational guidelines as it's specified here. And I'm also just thinking around a project that we have currently with Matanataki and an Australian funding as well. Because this is a new space that we're in, it's providing us, like you had mentioned, it's providing us with the very baby steps to start off with and the inception, etc. But I think it would help us too as project managers and having to strategically think across the longevity of having to sustain some of these blue economy pilot projects, to start also thinking of some of those red crosses that you also have there. I hope I make sense. I'd also really like to really welcome any further links or advisories from the team as well on that. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an amazing, I think probably next step as well for me maybe to take, because I think what you're referring to is like almost like an operational step-by-step for this ideation and conception phase. So not even like diving a bit deeper into these things here and having like you said, maybe a step-by-step is to like what to do when, right? Because I think that could be applicable among lots of small scale businesses or generalized, because I think what the work that Jackie and the team has been doing in the Solomons, just by understanding, okay, where do we start with the pilot? What do they need? Do they need training first? Do they need equipment first? Should we do assessments first of the climate of the communities? Like what's really the key of making this a success, and then how do we over time take ourselves maybe a bit out of the equation as well, to help them being able to sustain it independently. I think that's probably a good deep dive to have as a step-by-step guideline, which, like now thinking about it, which might be able to be applicable among many different kind of types of businesses. But of course, in the end, if we do have these examples from Solomons or so, it would be great to just have them as well as a blueprint from which others could just learn, right?
Right. Definitely, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, but that's a good point. Yeah, I note that down and see maybe if I can draft something like that up as well, and share it also with the round afterwards. Yeah. Any other questions? Otherwise, I would just like give you the offer again. Please feel free to reach out to me via email or wherever. If you want to just have a quick chat maybe around certain ideas that you've been having, because I feel like there's so much out there that could be done, and just like to have an open discussion and brainstorm a bit for you. Maybe there's the way of helping. So, and really there's, for me at least, there's no lines between Jeff, CRRI. So yeah, just feel free to reach out, and hopefully we can or learn from each other as well, and make a bit more in the sustainable blue economy, and especially reef positive solution space over the next few months and years over the project, because I think it's an exciting topic where we all need to be a bit more probably the vocal leader on for some of these private sectors to come in that space as well. Awesome. But then thank you all for taking the time, and I'm just gonna quickly share the link again from the survey, and it would be great if you could quickly fill it out in the remaining time that we're just quickly stopping short of, because I think it's quite important for the Jeff project that we get some of the data. That would be great if you have not yet done so, to fill this out as well. Yeah, I'm over the jet lag. Thanks, Mike. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Some of you are probably taking your day now, and the rest is just starting it. All right. Have a good one. Thank you.
Chris. Naka.
Naka.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.